Ready? 3, 2, 1. Hey, what's going on, guys? Oldschoolmatt here, back with another Water Buffalo Training Method After Hours podcast. Today, I'm joined by my friend Samuel Tao. He's a fellow classmate of mine, or a former classmate of mine, for me to say. Now he's attending the University of Toledo's med school. Sam is, he was a bio major when he went to UF. We actually met on the UF ride board. He gave me a ride. I think you give me a ride to or from Gainesville? Forget.
It was from Orlando to Gainesville.
Yeah, it was from Orlando to Gainesville. So we met on the ride board, super random, but, we became good friends. He became a supporter of the business that we're running. And Sam's a really, really cool kid. He's really smart. And he's also a beast when it comes to working out and fitness. So without further ado, Samuel Tao.
Hi, I'm Samuel Tao. And I just actually want to point out that it was actually very coincidental how I met Matthew. I actually missed my flight from the previous day. So I had to take the next day's flight, and that's how I met him. So if I didn't miss my flight, I wouldn't have ever met him or known about his amazing company. So I have to give some kudos to missing my flight. And so I just recently graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in biology, cum laude. And I'll be attending the University of Toledo Medical School in the fall to pursue my degree for a doctor in medicine, or MD degree.
Yeah, it's awesome, bro. And, funny story, when me and Sam first met, you were going to Colombia, right?
I was actually flying back from Bogota, Colombia to Orlando.
Oh, okay. And I think we were going from there to Gainesville. So, Sam's somebody who likes to travel the world a lot. He's been to, how many countries have you been to?
17.
17. So he's been all across the world. I remember we were talking in the car just about the places that he's been to and the different experiences that he's had. And we wanted to have Sam on today, obviously because he's a friend of ours. He's a supporter of Water Buffalo, but he has got a really strong mind, and he's really, really smart when it comes to different things, because he's had I think that traveling a lot has a really big and a good, giving you a good perspective on the world and different policies and social, ethical issues and whatnot. So I kind of wanted to ask you, Sam, real quick before we dive into some topics, how is traveling? Because I don't really travel that often, but I'm hoping to travel more after I graduate.
Yeah.
How has traveling kind of helped you form your kind of your mindset or the different things that you think about the world with?
So traveling has really opened my mind about how people live in different parts of the world, the culture, the government, the social policies in different parts of the world. And it's really interesting for me to be able to compare what the cultural systems, what the social systems, what the governments are like in other parts of the world with that in my own country, the United States of America. And that's really sometimes it's really given me some appreciation of what I have in this country, but sometimes it also teaches me or opens my mind more about other perspectives, whether or not they could sometimes be better than what we have. They could sometimes be worse, but they just really open my mind and allow me to not just see what's going on in my own country or what the policies are in my own country, but also see and compare how my country differs from those systems in other countries.
Definitely. And I wanted to ask you real quick, what are some countries that you've been to that in your opinion, they maybe quote unquote do things better than in the US? Because I always think about that too, because I don't really travel often, like I said, but I always wonder, how are some governments and how are some social and political policies, economic policies in certain countries, how may they, kind of help us, guide us, our country, to move forward? Because obviously, the United States of America is probably, if not one of the greatest countries in the world, but we do have a lot of flaws. And as we'll get into, and as we see that stuff going on today, we have a lot of social flaws, especially. So do you know any countries, or can you think of any countries in your opinion that are doing things the quote unquote right way or a better way than the US?
So I just want to start to say that first of all, I'm very proud to be American. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in the world. I think America is the best country in the world, the best, not one of the best, the best. But I also agree that we're definitely not perfect, and we're definitely not the best in every category. So in regards to social issues, in many parts of Europe, where they do excel is I would say equality. The data, without doubt, the data points to Europe having more equal incomes, more equal attainment of education. America actually, if you look at the data, is among developed countries is one has one of the highest income inequalities in the world. It has a GINI coefficient of 0.45, which like puts it in the top 15 countries in the world, I think, and it's the highest in among OECD or developed countries. But and because there's more equality in many European countries I've been to, such as Germany or Austria or even Spain, I think that ultimately causes fewer social, like less friction because people are more equal. There's not as much fight or debate over who has the haves and have-nots.
Mm.
Everyone, for example, may, regardless of their race or socioeconomic status, will have more equal, more similar access to education, to healthcare, and ultimately, I think it's this equality that prevalent in many European countries that um, that causes fewer social friction. But one reason why I think that these countries are more equal in the first place is because their populations, to start with, are more homogenous, and homogeneity, because the populations are homogenous, there are fewer racial tensions
Mm.
or economic tensions to begin with. And also, America also has, like, I think, a very, very unique history, especially with slavery. And because our racial, we have such a diverse population from the beginning, from since 1619, we've had like many races intermingling in our country. That has also created, I guess, a history and more developed more of like a system that because like um back then equality was not as it just wasn't as prominent. We've also we've kind of like automatically we've had groups of people who were disenfranchised. And although now we say we're equal, we say we promote equality, we um, embrace diversity, there's still these, I would say, scars in from our past that other European countries, they never had the chance to experience because they always had a very homogenous population, and they maintained it either through active prevention of immigration, or just they never had the opportunity to have a diverse population like we have. So I think like our diversity is our strength, but at times it can also be our weakness because it could often create racial and class conflicts.
Yeah, I got you. That makes a lot of sense. And I was actually going to bring about this thing that I've heard from other people talking about. So obviously, the problems that we have in the United States, like you said, are kind of like rooted in history in a way, and there might be like some sort of like not bad taste, but like almost like a resentful sort of society that we live in. And like you said, that we haven't kind of like we think that we've embraced equality, but in reality we haven't in certain ways, and it's kind of being exploited now. But there are other countries that have dealt with slavery before. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
Latin American countries have
Yeah.
been enslaved by Spaniards,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't see the same type of hatred or the same type of um, sort of, I guess, decline in social justice in these populations. Could you kind of explain maybe why? Because like I know, like for instance, Peru, they were
Mm-hmm.
like enslaved by the Spaniards up until the late 1850s or the
Mm-hmm.
1900s,
Yeah.
but there's not this type of clash in race and equality in those
Mm-hmm.
countries. I don't know why. Maybe you can explain because I think you have
Yeah.
more of a insight on that than someone like myself would.
But even in like a lot of Latin American countries, like one particular example that I can think of is Brazil, which was actually one of the last countries to abolish slavery, I believe,
Hmm.
in the 1890s. And while like on the news, many like from America, we might not think that there's inequality there. Those countries actually like Latin America, actually, Latin American countries actually have one of the highest rates of income inequality in the world. Like I think Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, those countries all rank in the top 5 among income
Okay.
inequality. In many Latin American countries, actually, if you look at the demographics of the top like let's say the top 25% of earners, if you go to like a wealthy area, a wealthy district where there's modern skyscrapers, modern apartments, where it looks just like any developed country.
Hmm.
And then when you go to the slums, you'll see that the people in those two areas look quite different. Like
Yeah.
the wealthy areas are mainly Caucasian people of European descent, while the lower income areas of those countries are people generally more minority groups, such as indigenous uh, populations or Afro Latinos.
Yeah. So really quick, my grandfather, he's Afro Latino. He was born in Cusco, and he has that sort of mix in him as well. But what I was trying to get to, and from my understanding, it seems like there isn't maybe it's because they haven't exploited it yet, but in I'm going to ask you this question. In your experience, have, because I know you've been to a lot of Hispanic countries before, right? Latin, you've been to a lot of Latin American countries.
Yeah, I've
What?
been to several. I've been to Mexico, Honduras, I've actually Panama, Colombia, and I don't know if Puerto Rico counts.
So when you go there, have you been surrounded by like the poorer areas, or do you typically go to like the high? I don't remember you. I remember we talked a little bit about this in the car, but when you go, do you experience the whole country, or you just go to like the touristy spots?
I usually just stay in one city,
Hmm.
but I usually stay if I go in the safe area, which is usually the
Yeah.
affluent areas. But and this is just also from like I never been to Brazil, but from a lot of like what I've read and just from like sometimes from media, like if you watch like a lot of
I lost you again, Sam. So Sam was just talking about the certain media outlets in these countries, and was talking about the division in these countries as well. So let Sam talk about that real quick, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so just from like my experience watching movies or shows or the news in these countries, you see that the people who are portrayed in the media or on television, even in these countries, they're not really representative of the general population. They tend to be skewed towards more Caucasian or people with mestizo or people with like more Caucasian ancestry or
Hmm.
Caucasian features. And this isn't just in Latin America. This is also in India and a lot of other places where it seems like Caucasian features are more prominent on media.
Yeah. So do you think this has any sort of ties to like the United States and whatnot, and what's like going on now? Like, do you think that maybe racism or prejudice towards fair skin is like a worldwide problem, or where do you fall on this? And like you having such like and I consider you as somebody who has like a really global perspective on the way that the world works. Someone like myself, I don't really talk about this type of stuff because I don't know. I've only been out of the country like 3 or 4 times. So like, what do you think is the reason for this? And is this the same type of prejudice that we're seeing in the United States, or is the United States a little different?
So it is definitely a global phenomenon. It's not limited to the United States or the Americas. It's like everywhere around the world, Caucasian features like such as lighter skin or like a more prominent nose,
Mhm.
they're common. Like even China and Asia, where I come from, the actresses there, they pale skin's actually very favored because uh, people because people believe there that dark skin is like indicative of like you being a lower class. You're spending all your time outside like farming, so
Mhm.
that's why fair skin or a pale skin is highly valued there. And also you see in South Korea, so many actors and actresses there, they get nose jobs. They make their nose look more Caucasian and Western because those features are favored there. And also India, if you watch Bollywood movies, you'll see that many people there are also most of the actors there are also fair skin and have tend to have more Western features. So I think the preference of West or the influence of Western features or Western media is prevalent throughout the whole world, not just the United States or Latin America. But racial tensions, I think it it is a little different. What I want to say first of all, though, is that in my personal opinion, America one of the is like among the least racist countries in the world. We definitely have racial problems. We definitely there's no doubt that certain minority groups have lower incomes than the majority. But in my opinion, America is a country where, at least in law, everyone is treated fairly. Discriminatory practices are completely banned. Like you cannot just not hire someone or not you can't fire someone for being of a certain race, religion, or gender. So I think in America, we actually have quite a few protections. Like in a lot of other countries in the world, racial tension or racial biases are much more they're much more profound. Like
Mhm.
for example, in China, where my family comes from, actually, it's kind of ridiculous that like in the the best-selling brand of toothpaste there, actually surprisingly, its mascot is a guy in blackface. So
Mhm.
that's like very just very
Racist.
shocking. That's something that we would never see here. And in the media there are also people dress up in blackface all the time.
Mhm.
Like if like I think it was like a gala for Chinese New Year. There was a skit where it was basically Chinese people who painted their faces dark and they pretended to be Africans. And also Africans, there are people of African descent, they're heavily discriminated against. They're heavily they're even persecuted. Like during the recent coronavirus epidemic, the Chinese authorities explicitly said they explicitly prevented people who looked African or were of African descent from going out, from exercising their rights. They purposely made them extended their quarantine. So those are things that would never be allowed in this country. That they violate the constitutional and other laws set in this country. So, uh, and it's not just China. Like throughout Eastern Europe, also, I felt like there was a little bit of scorn. There was a little bit of discrimination because I was of a different race. So it wasn't. I think in terms of in terms of in terms of rights and racial rights, I think America is does a really good job in, at least from a legal perspective, trying to treat everyone equally.
So now I guess we can kind of move into like how it plays out in action, because obviously what you're saying doesn't resonate with a lot of people in our society. A lot of people think that America is probably the worst place on the planet to be, a minority in a way. A lot of people, especially, what's going on now with a lot of the African Americans, they think that like the United States is of like, of, you know, almost trying to out to get African Americans.
Mhm.
So just based off of like what you were talking about, do you think that in a way it's really based off of the individual rather than the institution itself? Because you hear a lot of like institutional racism. Things were founded off institutional racism, which is true in a way. I think that certain police departments in the South during the slavery times were made to catch slaves. I think.
Yeah, of course,
Um,
and Jim Crow also.
yeah, but I think that there has been a substantial amount of change to our legislation and our laws that kind of may combat that truth in a way. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to explain, but
Yeah,
maybe you can bounce off of my ideas and kind of give, like I said, because I think you have a really good global perspective about this stuff, and give maybe like your take on this institutional racism uh, argument or arguing point that is brought up a lot.
mhm. So like on paper, basically what I was saying, like on paper we say we have no racism, we say we protect everyone equally, we say everyone has equal rights, and is prevented from discrimination. But I think both institutionally and inherently, we still have remnants of racism. Like in, I actually just took a test where it showed that all of us, many people have inherent racism. For example, it will be like implicit. We don't even know we're racist. We don't intend to be racist, but we still do. Like for example, there will be a picture showing um, depicting bank robbers or criminals, and most people, they will automatically just instinctively choose, say that the picture with the African American man is the bank robber compared to a picture with a Caucasian man. So inherently, I think just probably based on maybe media or based on our experiences, we are already showing signs of racism. And so that is one problem that we could try to eradicate in the future. And another thing about institutional racism is, I think is just is not limited to necessarily, like, I think it's more dependent on the individual also than the group. Like I understand that, so, implicitly we are more likely to see an African American man as having a higher risk of committing a crime or being a suspect, and we are more likely to stop them if we see something suspicious or pull them over. But on an individual level, we also see that even among different African American individuals or subgroups, they have different experiences. For example, many I personally, especially in South Florida, there are many people of African descent who are actually immigrants from either West Africa or the Caribbean. And I think I'm not one of them, but I do have some friends who are. And I have many neighbors where I grew up who were African, um, who were immigrants to this country, but are of African descent, like either from Jamaica or Bahamas or Nigeria. And their experiences are actually, I think, quite different also from the African American population who mainly descended from slaves brought to this country. Like among them, they tend to have and I think this is kind of true with all immigrants. Their values are kind of similar to other immigrants also. Like they tend to have higher rates of education. Their parents tended to be like more dual income households or dual parent households. uh, they tended to attend college or graduate from college more often. They tended to be placed in higher paying jobs. And I'm sure that I do know that they still occasionally experience racism, such as they might be more likely to be pulled over by a cop than or seen as more suspicious. But because they are, I guess they are of a higher socioeconomic status than many African Americans, a higher educational status also. Their experiences may be different. They might be less likely to fall victim to a corrupt criminal justice system. They may be less likely to spend time in jail for drug crimes. So their experiences are also quite different than African Americans.
So that was a really good point. I think you hit on talking about. So it's of the same skin color. They're all considered Black Americans or even African Americans, but some are come from immigrant descent, and some come have been ancestors of people who were enslaved. Do you think that there's something in the individuals there that kind of tell us why certain things are happening? Like you were kind of saying, like why they might not be pulled over as often or not, and why they're it doesn't make a lot of sense that someone who immigrates here would have a higher income than someone who was born here. But it so often does and happens. Do you think that maybe like the values of immigrants has a big role in the way that they're treated in society, even though they're of the same skin color in a way?
So I don't think their values dictate how they are treated
Mhm.
by others, but I think it's their values that help propel them to more to be more educated, to achieve better jobs, to achieve more stability in their family. I think it's those values of, I guess, hard work, determination, and a focus on education. That's one thing that's I notice is key in like among a lot of immigrants from like both Asia, Africa, South America, education. So I think it's those values that pull them up to a point where they are first less likely to be involved in crime and the criminal justice system, even though they may be just as equally likely to be suspected implicitly by a cop of a crime. They're less likely to be involved in the criminal justice system, and they're it's kind of like the model minority myth. I think that's what basically what immigrants generally are. They try to they try to assimilate to this into this country and do their best to ensure that they're productive and they're productive for this country.
Do you think that's a way to maybe be like not a solution, because obviously nobody should be treated the way that certain people are treated in our society and certain events that happen, but do you think that education is like the key to making leaps and bounds forward for African Americans or for minorities in general?
I think education is definitely one of the most important factors, especially in this economy today, where a lot of manufacturing jobs have disappeared, and more jobs require a college degree or require technical skills. So education, I think, and one of the main reasons I think why African Americans continue to be oppressed or
Hmm.
continue to struggle to move up the socioeconomic ladder starts with it's basically like a school to prison pipeline. Like to start with, schools that are attended primarily by African American students are grossly underfunded compared to the schools in wealthier neighborhoods, because like in this country we don't not all schools are funded equally. It depends on like the property taxes in the particular area. So just that beginning of lower quality schools is already like a smack in the head, and then more and more setbacks, which are it's like a cycle, because they don't have as good of a primary education. They're less likely to be able to get accepted into a college or attend college, and then that in turn means that they work a minimum or lower paying job for the rest of their lives, and they're unable to afford expensive or better housing in a better neighborhood with better schools, so their kids also attend the same schools and kind of just repeat that cycle.
So what if you were someone who could make some changes? Like I think that your opinions, like having such a global, like I keep bringing this back, but I think it's really important is just knowing like what different societies do. Like what would be like one of your solutions maybe to like the problems that's going on in our society? And this is aside from like police brutality, and obviously we can get into that later, but this just has to do with like the bigger picture, because in reality, police brutality is obviously an issue not only with African Americans, with minorities in general. It happens to other minorities as well. Obviously, African Americans it's being more sensationalized now because of what happened to George Floyd. But one of the bigger issues and the bigger topics is like we're talking about is the income in African American household, and the majority of the problems arising from these sorts of like this feedback loop that you were talking about. So maybe what would you do to kind of like solutionize all this in terms of education and policy?
So I actually know a lot of people, like a lot of politicians, I think are considering reparations, which I don't really see as like working. I don't really see just giving people money
Hmm.
like as working. Yes, it will give them more spending power, and maybe they'll be able to afford more education or a better place, or give tutoring to their children or attend college. But I think it has to first start with the school system. Like we have to fund all schools regardless of the neighborhood
Hmm.
equally. Like I think schools shouldn't be primarily funded by property taxes. They should be just primarily funded by government spending, or the government should make up should particularly target schools in lower income neighborhoods to ensure that they have good quality teachers and a good quality education. And also the teachers, that's one thing that I think is really important to address, because they have good quality, if we could attract good quality teachers, then we could also produce higher achieving students. And but one thing I also see a problem with is if everyone all of a sudden has a good quality education, then in the capitalistic society, there's always has to be some people who are up here and some others who are down here. If everyone starts to have a good quality education, then that education also kind of starts diluting.
Hmm.
Like if everyone has a bachelor's degree all of a sudden, then an employer might require a master's degree or a PhD next. So um, it's important to have a good quality education, but I think it's also important to ensure that there are jobs available with that good quality education. Like what's good of an education if like you're still working at McDonald's despite having so much knowledge and so much education.
And I think that when I was working for the congressman in Gainesville, my freshman and sophomore year, something that like is kind of like hidden and that isn't really promoted as much, and maybe it is now because like ads on YouTube and stuff, but it should really be starting to like be put out there not only for African Americans but for minorities and people who don't have the same maybe drive to go to college. Are trade
Mhm.
schools, so
Yeah.
people can get trades and
Mm.
do that because there's you're still going to need plumbers, electricians, and whatnot. And I think that they're still decently paying jobs, and they offer security, financial security when it comes to people in their lives and whatnot. And they're not like like you're saying, like just minimum wage jobs or jobs that pay like under $12 an hour. But these schools offer a less rigorous academic um, uh, what's it called, academic like requirements, but they also give off someone like a career that they can follow and maybe even become entrepreneurial. But I think it's a good like segue into the next topic that I kind of wanted to talk about. And like really a lot of the problems come down to like the individual. So like the case that happened with George Floyd, and police brutality, we see that the officer who um, happened to murder George Floyd was already he already had a lot of track record, or according to the news that he like had, I think it was like 18 complaints filed against him and whatnot. And maybe attacking this type of stuff versus attacking like a whole like the whole police force and law enforcement. I think that one of the solutions that I've heard, and I think it's a really good idea, and I want to kind of ask you about this too, switching over to like the more sensational topic that's going on right now, is like ensuring that there is audits done to police officers in their departments to ensure that there's no sort of like bias or racist things that are going on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think improving training is definitely one of the solutions to ending police brutality. And I think also having a more diverse police force is also
Hmm.
pretty key, because like training could vary greatly throughout
Yeah.
throughout different departments.
That's
So
impressive.
I think having a uniform training, especially after this incident, having like a uniform protocol, a uniform type of training in this scenario would definitely ease up, prevents such incidents from happening in the future or happening less often in the future.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to maybe switch a little bit of gears, just to kind of talk about people that are our age and that are deciding to take actions on this sensational topic in a way that doesn't really make any sense, especially when it comes to like the rioting and the looting and stuff like that. And I think that obviously the stuff that's going on with George Floyd and the stuff that's happened in the past is really, really, sad. But I think that we can separate both issues and kind of look at like look on society and see how people are reacting to like this type of crisis. And I think that it's almost like a shame. I'm ashamed of people my age that are hurting innocent people and that are putting other
Mhm.
people lives at stake and generalizing law enforcement and public officials that don't necessarily agree with the violence as like fascists or people that are racist. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion on what you think that like why do you think maybe people feel this way, and why is it not the way to go with this type of stuff?
So I think like many people like us, they're acting childish. Like they don't like something, so they act out. I think that's what they're doing without reason. Like they're fueled by passion a lot more than reason. And I think as there's some like some of their leaders or some people like have these more radical ideas, they start to like it's like group mentality. If like in psychology, if you start out like with a moderate view, but then there's a lot of people around you with these more polarizing views, then you're more likely to gravitate towards them. So I think that's also a factor. People are just also starting to polarize more and more to one side. But I think at this time what we need more than ever is unity,
Hmm.
rather than division. I think there's a lot of division right now between one side who supports rioting and says property can like lives matter a lot more than property, and the other side who's more rational and supports protests and condemns the case and and recognizes the need for future change, but supports a way that in which we do it more peacefully and without looting or rioting. So I think this division in this country right now between these two sides is really also what's something that needs to be changed. Like both sides need to come together in the middle.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to unity in our country, it's hard to really pitch unity because it's not sensational. And I know that we're both around the same age, and a lot of people in our age groups they tend to gravitate towards, like you're saying, like almost like that group mentality. And I think it really comes down to being an individual and having your own mind and to be able to think on your own, sort of thing. I think that too many people are really trying to just be more sensational and be more not even proactive, but just be more active in a way. But people need to start learning how to be more proactive. And I think that different ways of showing that you have care about this, that you care about what's going on, doesn't have to necessarily mean supporting certain acts of violence, supporting negative, really, really negative rhetoric towards police officers and whatnot, and law enforcement and people that maybe don't want to speak out, that don't want to get involved on social media. Like I've seen things when people say like if you're not being vocal, then you're part of the problem. I don't think that that's really like appropriate. I think
Yeah.
that people should have the right to say and do whatever they want.
Mhm.
Obviously, someone like myself and you, we don't advocate for racism. We're both minorities. We advocate for things to be fair, and everything to be super positive and always together. But I think that each side, and more so the side of the protesters, especially the radical protesters, are trying to pull people that are rational closer to their side and start incite these sort of like quote unquote, they call them revolutions, but in reality, I think it's just instilling fear in the American people and causing more chaos. I wanted to ask you, Sam, if you had to like, kind of like go out and make some sort of statement on this, what would you tell people, and like what do you think that would be like the fix to this in this whole situation that's going on? I know it's a really, really like loaded question, but maybe like give some insight and some perspective on how you think that you can, not just you, but how you think our people in our generation can be better and be more effective with what they're trying to do.
So I think it's important for people to know that committing violence, that just gets attention. It does not give them any credibility, and it does not propel their movement or propel their activism any farther than if they were to just peacefully protest, peacefully demand, which I completely support, peaceful demonstration, and I support the core of their cause. I just don't support their violent their their use of violence. I think they use violence to get attention. To get attention from the media, to get attention from the president, to get attention from the government. So I would just tell them that they're not getting any positive attention by committing violence. And if you really want to solve the systemic issues of racism, if you really want to solve the systemic um, issues of police brutality, you should just write to your legislatures. You should just protest in front of the peacefully protest in front of the judiciary, in front of your state governments, to let them know what you want. And one important thing you could also do is by voting. That's your biggest voice. If you can vote for candidates who voice your cause or who support your cause. So I think that there are much more effective ways you can get your message across than by looting and rioting and just you're just I think you're by doing that you're just tarnishing whole the whole reputation of your group and the 95% of other people in your group who had no intentions of that. You just automatically label them also as violent protesters. So just do it peacefully and vote and persuade your legislators to change the laws, because it's the local government where criminal justice can have the most impact.
And I kind of wanted to add this too, because I feel like this is something that should be said. What you say, Sam, is like harder. It's harder to write a letter to your congressman or write a letter to your local state legislator or your mayor or get people to sign a petition. It's harder to, write multiple letters, keep sending, and it's harder to go out and actually vote and do research on policy and do research on candidates. It's easier for people to go out and riot and have one night where they go and just want to be sensational and make a video to go viral. It's easier to repost things on their story. And now obviously like social media is very effective, but what I think that needs to happen, and I hope that this does happen, is that people that are very, very people that have a voice in that community, obviously someone like myself, I'm not African American, so I can't really relate and say that I have been subject to racism in the same way that certain African Americans have. I understand that there are certain biases that do occur in society and they need to be changed. So I can't really be this spokesperson for that minority, but I can definitely help others and help spread the word of good people that are speaking out the truth and speaking out things that make sense. And I always will. I'll always make sure that I push positivity. But I think that what people need to understand, and if people actually care about this cause and want to keep advocating for this, they need to be persistent, they need to be patient, and they need to have some sort of intelligent plan to make this happen. It can't just be like a week's worth of social media, blaring stuff on social media, and then it's forgotten about until the next incident, and then it just gets more sensational, more traction. I think that if people really want to make a change, like we were talking about before, it needs to come within the individual, and they need to really sit down and say, okay, if this is something that is really, really important to me, I need to write to my local legislators. I need to take notes. I need to do research. I need to talk to this person. I need to find out how I'm going to make an impact rather than just kind of follow a herd of people. I don't know if you'd agree, but I think that's a really, in my opinion, a really effective way to make something happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I especially like how you say patience. That's something that I think is lacking a lot in today's society. Like I don't know if it's like all the social media or like our impulsive habits, but people lack patience. I think many people are just hopping. They support the cause, but they're at the same time they're hopping on the bandwagon of sharing just all these ideas, and that they may not even totally support, but because it, I guess, goes aligns with their beliefs, they
Mm-hmm.
just hop on this bandwagon too quickly. I think change is like it needs to be slow. Change is not gonna be like 1 week or 2 weeks. Change,
Yeah,
like someone can can make an impact, for example, in the community by starting an organization where
yeah.
they help they tutor low income kids from these neighborhoods so they have a better they have a better chance at succeeding in their academics. They can start organizations that or nonprofits that help these communities specifically. I think those are much more effective ways than just trying to get attention and sharing stuff all over the place.
See, like someone like Martin Luther King, who I think is a really, really good figurehead and someone who can really like inspire other African American speakers or just speakers in general to kind of like help people and advocate for a good cause. He was like, I don't know the exact amount of years, but I know he was advocating for civil rights. And I know obviously the times were a lot different back then, but he was advocating for, decades. It was taking him a long time to get to where he got the country and
Mhm.
unite the country. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't, with posting on social media for, like we said, 3 or 4 days and then never talking about it until the next issue. If people really care about the cause and are really truly, they're like passionate about like they say they are, they need to have patience, they need to have persistence and do it over a period of time because eventually it's like going to the gym. And I don't want to compare it to going to the gym because it's like very different in its own ways. But like it's like the person that's like, I want to get in shape right now. And then they work out for like 2 weeks. And then after, something, they go out for a weekend or they go away. Then they forget about the gym for the next 6 months until they see a picture of someone ripped in a magazine or something. I think it's the same kind of principle here is that, like I said before, like I've told people, it's the problem really lies within individuals in our society and our we are hesitant to stick to a certain thing. Everything needs to be so fast moving, and I think it's another time to talk about this is doing talk about social media. Everything's so instant on social media, so that's why I think that people nowadays are so they want things to happen like really really fast. And
Instant gratification.
yeah, and it's in reality things that will actually, like you were saying, change is slow. And I think that the only way that things are actually going to change is over a longer period of time. But that's what's going to matter because it's going to become a habit, and it'll be things that will stick in our,
Mhm.
in our history rather than like this. Like I said, the gym, like the guy who goes to the gym for 3 weeks or starts a hobby for 3 weeks and then never touches it again. So
Yeah, and this like you mentioned the civil rights movement. Like it started in 1954, I believe, with a simple act, Rosa Parks
mhm.
not giving up her seat, and then after she was arrested, it's gradually started changing. Gradually, more people started taking stances, and it finally culminated 14 years later, 1968, with the Civil Rights Act passed. And it's not just civil rights, like the gay rights, the LGBT rights history. It started with a Stonewall riot in 1969. And then gradually in 1973, I think the Department of Justice declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. And then states started gradually legalizing marriage, and same-sex partners started gradually getting the same protections as heterosexual couples. And finally 2015, um, became gay marriage became legal in the United States. So it's a marathon. It's not like something you can just
Yeah.
get done in a short amount of time.
Definitely. And I think that's a good stopping point for this podcast. It's been a really good conversation, Sam. I really appreciate having you on, bro. It's. I think a lot of your words, hopefully, with whoever's watching, kind of resonates with people from both sides. Even though there shouldn't really be sides, but like we were saying in this time, it's really popular to be sensational, and it's really cool to be on one side or another side. In reality, we should always just try to lean towards the truth, whether that be a conservative or a liberal mindset, whichever one makes the most sense in our society and allows us to reach the truth and is logical. I feel like that we should follow. But like we were saying, it's we're so divided now. We're not just gonna come together and just become like a happy society. It's gonna take time for us to even get together as a society, disregarding just the racial stuff, just as people to come together. It's going to take a long time, but I think that hopefully more people like myself and yourself who are, maybe we have our political views, but we're more open to new ideas and we're more open to things. And we want to make sure that it's in society's best interest to do these things. The more and more we advocate for this and the slower that this change happens, I think the better our world is going to be, because the way that we're divided right now, I can't see that this lasting much longer without there being some sort of like conflict. So like real conflict.
Yeah. All right. It was a great pleasure speaking with you. I think I've learned a lot from this dialogue.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. So I learned a lot too, and I hope whoever is listening to this podcast has gotten something out of it. We appreciate you guys watching. Take care. Check Sam out. What's your Instagram, Sam?
Right now it's at Uncle Sam Wants Cash.
At Uncle Sam Wants Cash. So follow at Uncle Sam Wants Cash. Sam's a really cool dude, and hopefully we'll do this sometime again soon, bro. Hope you guys are having a good rest of your night. Peace.